Hello.
I'm Sullivan. First time posting here, though I've been lurking for a while. I'm a 45-year-old accountant, married for 15 years to Aurora, and a stepdad to her daughter, Brooke. At least, I thought I was a stepdad in the traditional sense. That illusion came crashing down last month, and I feel like I've been living in someone else's bad dream ever since. It all started innocently enough, or so I thought. I was cleaning out the attic, finally tackling the pile of old junk we'd been putting off for years. Aurora had always been fiercely protective of her memory boxes. She claimed they were sentimental, full of mementos from her youth. But as I reached for a particular dusty suitcase, her tone changed. "What are you doing? Leave that one. It's nothing important," she snapped. Her sudden defensiveness set off alarm bells. Being an accountant, I've got a nose for things that don't add up. So when she left for a supposed work event that evening, I went back to the attic. I couldn't help myself. I dragged the suitcase down to the living room, took a deep breath, and opened it. Inside was a treasure trove of lies, letters, photographs, hotel receipts, and printed text spanning years, decades, even. Each one was a punch to the gut, laying out in sickening detail a long-term affair between Aurora and a man named Fletcher. And here's the kicker, it predated our marriage. It didn't take long to piece together that this wasn't just some fling. Fletcher wasn't some random guy, he was Brooke's biological father. I sat there, staring at a picture of them laughing together in some beachside cabana, the date stamped just a month before Aurora and I got married. The timeline hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a life built on a foundation of deceit. Brooke walked in as I was sitting there, the suitcase open on the coffee table. She froze. Her face went pale, but her eyes darted to the contents. That's when it clicked for me, she knew. She'd been in on it. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice shaking but firm. She didn't answer, just stared at the ground like a kid caught stealing. After a long silence, all she could muster was, "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "It's exactly what I think. And you've been covering for her, haven't you?" She stammered something about not wanting to hurt me, but I was already too far gone to hear her excuses. The betrayal was layered, and the people I trusted most had been complicit in tearing my life apart. 15 years of raising Brooke as my own, helping her through every scraped knee, math test, and teenage heartbreak, only to find out she wasn't mine in any sense of the word. I haven't confronted Aurora yet. Not fully. I'm gathering my evidence, documenting everything meticulously. If she wanted to play games, she picked the wrong guy. I've spent my career uncovering fraud and tracking down discrepancies. And let me tell you, I'm going to ensure this betrayal costs her everything. More to come. I'm not even close to done unraveling this web. Stay tuned. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my office, combing through every piece of evidence from that suitcase, organizing it into files, labeling each letter, photo, and receipt with dates and context. The more I worked, the angrier I got. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a single mistake. This was a calculated betrayal spanning over 2 decades. By the time Aurora came home from her work event, I was ready. She walked in, heels clicking on the tile, and set her purse down with that same ease she always had. I stood in the living room, the suitcase sitting on the coffee table where I'd left it. She froze when she saw it, her face immediately draining of color. "What's this, Aurora?" I asked, my voice calm but icy. She hesitated, trying to recover. "Why are you going through my stuff? That's private." "Private? That's what you're going with." I picked up one of the letters and held it up. "Does Fletcher know how protective you are of your memories? Or is he too busy sending you love notes while I'm paying for this house?" Her expression shifted, panic, then defiance. "Sullivan, it's not what you think. Stop. Just stop," I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. "I've read everything. I know about Fletcher, I know about the trips, the gifts, the hotels. I know about Brooke. Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out your entire marriage is a lie?" She tried to step closer, reaching for my arm, but I pulled away. "Don't touch me," I said sharply. "Not after this." "Let me explain," she pleaded. "It's complicated." "Oh, it's not complicated. You've been screwing Fletcher since before we got married. And Brooke isn't even mine, is she? You let me raise her, love her, sacrifice for her, and you never said a word." Her lips quivered, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she doubled down. I didn't want to hurt you, Sullivan. You've been a great father to Brooke. She loves you. Don't, I interrupted. Don't you dare spin this as some act of kindness. You've been lying to me for 15 years. And Brooke? She's been lying too. She knew, didn't she? Aurora's silence was confirmation enough. I stepped back, disgusted. You let me pour my time, money, and love into a family that wasn't even mine. You've made me a fool, Aurora. And now you're going to face the consequences. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You'll find out soon enough, I replied. But I'll tell you this, I'm done. You don't deserve me, and I'm not going to keep pretending this marriage means anything. I've been an accountant my whole life. You know what we do best? We settle accounts. And yours is about to come due. With that, I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, speechless. For the first time in years, I felt in control, and I wasn't about to let go. This was just the beginning. Next up, Brooke and her part in this mess. The next morning, I didn't bother waiting for Brooke to wake up. I stormed into her room just after sunrise. She was curled up under a mountain of blankets, headphones on, her phone glowing in her hand. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she sat up, startled. Get dressed, I said coldly. We're having a conversation. Now. I turned and walked downstairs without waiting for a reply. A few minutes later, she shuffled into the kitchen in her pajamas, her hair a mess, looking both annoyed and nervous. What's this about? She asked, her voice defensive. I didn't waste time. I slid one of the photos across the table, a picture of Aurora and Fletcher with Brooke as a toddler, her little arms wrapped around Fletcher's neck. Brooke's eyes widened, but she quickly masked it with a blank stare. Where did you get that? I found the suitcase, I said, leaning forward. I know everything, Brooke. About your mom, about Fletcher, and about the fact that he's your biological father. She swallowed hard but stayed quiet. Don't play dumb, I continued. You knew, didn't you? You've known for years, and you've been helping her cover it up. Lying to me, keeping me in the dark. Do you have any idea how that feels? To realize the girl I thought I was raising as my own has been complicit in deceiving me. Her lips trembled, but she crossed her arms, trying to act tough. I didn't ask for any of this, she said quietly. No, but you chose to keep it going, I shot back. Why, Brooke? Why didn't you tell me the truth? She finally broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. Because I didn't want to hurt you, okay? Mom told me not to say anything. She said you'd never understand, that it would ruin everything. I didn't want to lose you. Her words cut deep, but they didn't absolve her. You already lost me the moment you decided I didn't deserve the truth, I said. You and your mother didn't just hurt me, you destroyed everything we built as a family. And for what? To protect some fantasy world where lies don't matter. I didn't know what else to do, she sobbed. I was scared and Mom. She made it seem like it was for the best. Don't blame this entirely on her, I snapped. You're old enough to know the difference between right and wrong. You chose wrong. Over and over. Brooke crumpled, burying her face in her hands. A part of me wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't. Not after everything. You need to understand something, I said, my voice firm. I've loved you like my own daughter for 15 years. I've given you everything, time, money, support, and this is how you repay me? By lying to my face? By letting me be a stand-in while your real dad swoops in for the fun moments? She looked up, her eyes red and puffy. Fletcher's not my dad, she said bitterly. Not really. He's never been around. You're the one who's been there for me. You're my dad, not him. I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak. No, Brooke. I was your dad. But you and your mother took that away from me. You don't get to have it both ways. She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand to stop her. I'm not doing this to punish you, but you need to face reality. Actions have consequences. Your mom is going to lose everything, her marriage, her stability. And as for you, you've got some serious growing up to do. Starting now. I stood up and walked to the door. I'm filing for divorce, I said, pausing to look back at her. What happens to you after that? That's up to you. Brooke didn't say anything, just sat there sobbing as I left. For a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt, but I pushed it aside. She needed to understand that forgiveness wasn't a given, it had to be earned. And right now, I wasn't ready to give her even that. The day after my confrontation with Brooke, I made my first appointment with a divorce attorney. I'd been married to Aurora for 15 years, and as much as my pride screamed at me to pack my things and walk away, I knew better. I wasn't going to let her take me for a ride, not after what she'd done. My lawyer, Nathan, was an old colleague I'd worked with on some fraud investigations. If anyone could help me untangle this mess, it was him. I walked into his office with a file folder so thick it could barely close, filled with every piece of evidence I'd gathered. After the usual pleasantries, I laid it all out on his desk. The letters, the photos, the receipts, and my account of everything I'd discovered. Nathan flipped through the materials, nodding occasionally, but his face stayed mostly neutral. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "This is a lot," he finally said. "And it's damning. She's been carrying on this affair since before you got married." "Exactly," I said. "And Brooke's not even my biological daughter. Aurora knew that from the start but never told me." Nathan nodded, tapping his pen against his legal pad. "Okay, let's focus on two things: protecting your assets and making sure this divorce is as clean as possible on your end. Aurora's actions are going to weigh heavily in your favor, especially if you can prove financial misconduct. She used my money to fund some of their trips," I said bitterly, pointing to a handful of receipts. "Hotel stays, dinners. Fletcher didn't even have the decency to pay for their little rendezvous." Nathan's eyes lit up. "If we can demonstrate she used marital funds for the affair, that's big. Judges don't look kindly on that, especially when there's clear evidence." "Good," I said. "Because I want her to feel this. Every penny she took from me, every lie she told, I want it to cost her." Nathan held up a hand. "I get it, Sullivan, but we have to be smart about this. Vindication is great, but strategy wins the day. First, we'll start with the financials. You're an accountant, so I'm guessing you've kept track of everything." I pulled out another folder and handed it to him. "Every expense, every withdrawal. I even have records of her so-called business trips that line up with the receipts from the suitcase." Nathan flipped through the spreadsheets, impressed. "This is excellent work. It'll make the financial side of the case airtight. Now, let's talk about Brooke. What are your plans there?" I hesitated. Brooke wasn't my biological daughter, but I'd been her father in every meaningful way for 15 years. As much as I felt betrayed, cutting her off entirely felt wrong. "I don't know," I admitted. "She's just as guilty in all of this. But she's also a kid who was manipulated by her mother. I'm furious, but I don't want to destroy her." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "That's fair. Legally, you're not obligated to provide for her if she's not your biological child, and Aurora withheld that information. But if you want to include some kind of support, we can factor that into the settlement." "I'll think about it," I said. "Right now, I'm more concerned about making sure Aurora doesn't walk away from this unscathed. She built this web of lies, and she should face the consequences." Nathan smiled grimly. "She will. Between the financial records and the evidence of infidelity, we've got a solid case. But I have to ask, are you ready for the fallout? This isn't just about divorce, it's going to get messy. Aurora, Brooke, Fletcher. None of them are going to take this lying down." "I don't care," I said firmly. "They made their choices. Now they have to live with them." Nathan stood and extended his hand. "In that case, let's get to work." As I left his office, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. For the first time in weeks, I had a clear path forward. This wasn't going to be easy, but I was done being the victim. Aurora had gambled with my life, my love, and my trust, and now it was time for her to pay the price. The day I served Aurora the divorce papers, I made sure it would be unforgettable. I wasn't going to let her talk her way out of this or play the victim. I wanted her to see, in black and white, the consequences of her choices. I chose a Friday evening. Brooke had gone to stay at a friend's house for the weekend. Whether by coincidence or Aurora's design, I didn't care. It was better that she wasn't there. This was between me and Aurora. When she walked through the front door, she was greeted by the sight of me sitting at the dining room table, the papers laid out in front of me. I had copies of the evidence spread out next to them, photos, receipts, and letters. Her face paled as soon as she saw it. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaky but trying to sound authoritative. I didn't even look up at her. "Your future," I said flatly. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor. "Sullivan, we need to talk about this. You're overreacting. Overreacting. I finally looked up, and my voice was sharp enough to make her flinch. You've been lying to me for 15 years, Aurora. You've let me pour everything I have into a sham marriage, into raising a child who isn't even mine. And you think I'm overreacting? She tried to compose herself, folding her arms defensively. We can work through this. Couples do it all the time. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. We're not a couple, Aurora. We're a fraud. You made sure of that the moment you let Fletcher into your life and kept him there. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice cracking. It got out of control. Save it, I snapped, sliding the divorce papers across the table toward her. These are your options. You can sign them and make this relatively clean, or you can fight me in court. But if you choose the latter, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done. Her eyes darted to the papers and then to the evidence spread out beside them. You can't just take everything away from me, she said, her tone shifting to desperation. Oh, but I can, I said. And I will. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I've got records of how you used marital funds to support your affair. The hotel stays, the dinners, those came out of my pocket. And if you think I'm going to let you walk away with a dime more than you deserve, you're delusional. She sat down heavily, her hands trembling as she picked up the papers. What about Brooke? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You can't just abandon her. My jaw tightened. Brooke isn't my responsibility. She's Fletcher's. You've made that abundantly clear. But I'm not heartless. I'll think about including something for her, provided you don't make this any uglier than it already is. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they didn't move me. Sullivan, I know I hurt you, but please, don't do this. Don't destroy everything. You already did that, Aurora, I said coldly. Now I'm just leveling the playing field. I stood up and grabbed my coat. I'll be staying somewhere else for the time being, I said, heading for the door. You've got a week to decide how you want this to go. After that, all bets are off. As I walked out of the house, her sobs echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about taking back control of my life and ensuring that the people who betrayed me understood the true cost of their actions. I spent the weekend planning my next move. Aurora's betrayal had cut deep, but Fletcher? He was the catalyst for all of this. A man who not only destroyed my marriage but also waltzed in and out of my life, benefiting from my blind trust. He thought he'd gotten away with it. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Fletcher, the big-shot marketing consultant, had built a reputation as a suave, successful professional. His name was synonymous with charm in local circles, but I knew what was behind the facade, a lying, cheating homewrecker who didn't think twice about destroying families. On Monday morning, I made my first move. Using my accounting skills and access to public records, I dug into Fletcher's financials. It wasn't long before I found discrepancies, business expenses that looked suspiciously personal. Flights, high-end dinners, boutique hotel stays. The timestamps lined up almost perfectly with the evidence I'd found in Aurora's suitcase. He wasn't just morally corrupt, he was financially reckless too. Armed with my findings, I reached out to his employer, a high-profile marketing firm. I crafted an anonymous email, attaching the receipts and detailing how Fletcher had been misusing company funds for his escapades. I didn't hold back. The email painted a clear picture of a man who thought he was untouchable. Within 24 hours, the dominoes started to fall. By Tuesday afternoon, word got out that Fletcher had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. A few former colleagues of his, ones who had always resented his smug attitude, were quick to spread the news. But I wasn't done. The next phase of my plan was more personal. I tracked down Fletcher's wife, Melissa. I'd met her once at a company event years ago, polite, elegant, completely unaware of the double life her husband was leading. She deserved to know the truth, and I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. I showed up at her doorstep with a manila folder containing copies of everything. When she answered the door, her expression shifted from confusion to concern. Sullivan? What are you doing here? I'm sorry to show up like this, I said, but there's something you need to see. It's about Fletcher. She hesitated, but eventually invited me in. Sitting in her living room, I laid out the evidence on the coffee table. As she flipped through the photos and letters, her face went pale. How long? She whispered, her voice trembling. Over 2 decades, I said. He's been having an affair with my wife. I only just found out. Melissa's hands shook as she put the papers down. I had no idea. He always said he was working late, traveling for business. I nodded, feeling a pang of sympathy for her. That's how they operate. They count on people like us trusting them. For a moment, she just sat there, staring blankly at the evidence. Then her expression hardened. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I'll handle this." I left her house knowing I'd just appended another life, but I didn't feel guilty. Fletcher and Aurora had made their choices. Melissa and I were just collateral damage, victims who deserved the truth. By the end of the week, Fletcher's world was in shambles. His job was gone, his wife had kicked him out, and the once polished image he'd carefully cultivated was now in ruins. I felt a cold satisfaction watching it all unfold. This wasn't about pettiness or revenge, it was about justice. Fletcher had spent years benefiting from his lies. Now he was finally paying the price. By the weekend, the fallout from Fletcher's exposure was spreading like wildfire. In a town as tightly knit as ours, secrets don't stay buried for long. Fletcher's downfall became the talk of the community, and by extension, so did Aurora's betrayal. Everywhere I went, I felt the stares and heard the whispers. Some people were sympathetic, others curious, and a few had that smug satisfaction people get when they're watching someone else's drama unfold. Aurora wasn't handling it well. I stopped by the house on Saturday to pick up some documents I'd left in my office. When I walked in, the air was thick with tension. Aurora was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty glass of wine in front of her. She looked up at me, her eyes bloodshot from what I assumed was a combination of crying and drinking. "You happy now?" she spat. "Excuse me," I replied, keeping my tone even. "You've ruined everything. Fletcher's out of a job. Melissa's thrown him out. And now everyone in town knows about us," she said, her voice trembling. I dropped my bag on the counter and stared at her. "You ruined everything, Aurora." "Not me. I'm just making sure the truth comes to light. Maybe if you hadn't lied for 15 years, you wouldn't be in this position." She scoffed, but there was no fire behind it. "People are treating me like I'm some kind of monster. They don't understand." "They understand just fine," I interrupted. "You lied, cheated, and let someone else pay for your choices. You're not a victim here, Aurora." She started to say something else, but I cut her off. "I'm not here to argue. I came to get my things. After that, you won't have to see me again unless it's in a courtroom." As I headed upstairs, I heard her mutter something under her breath, but I didn't care enough to ask what it was. Brooke's isolation. When I came back down, Brooke was sitting in the living room, her face buried in her phone. She didn't look up as I passed, but I could feel the weight of her guilt hanging in the air. "How are you holding up?" I asked, more out of obligation than concern. She shrugged without looking at me. "People are talking about us at school," she mumbled. "My friends are being weird." I wanted to feel bad for her, but it was hard. She'd made her choices too, even if Aurora had manipulated her. Still, I couldn't ignore the fact that she was a kid stuck in the middle of this disaster. "Maybe now you'll understand how lies catch up to you," I said. "People can forgive a lot, but trust? Once that's gone, it's hard to get back." She didn't respond, just pulled her knees to her chest and stared at the floor. I left without saying anything else. Brooke had a long road ahead of her if she ever wanted to make things right, but that was her journey, not mine. Reclaiming my life. For the first time in years, I felt free. The house, Aurora, Brooke, none of it weighed me down anymore. I moved into a small apartment downtown and spent the weekend setting it up. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I also started reaching out to old friends and colleagues. Over the years, I'd let a lot of relationships slide, too focused on being the perfect husband and stepdad. Now that I was on my own, I realized how much I needed those connections. By Sunday evening, I had dinner plans with an old coworker, tickets to a basketball game with a college buddy, and a long overdue phone call scheduled with my sister. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger or despair. I felt hope. By the time our divorce mediation rolled around, I was prepared. Aurora showed up looking like she'd aged 10 years in a month. Gone was the confident, polished woman who could charm anyone in the room. In her place was someone who clearly realized the game was over, but she still tried to put up a fight. We sat across the table in a stark conference room, our respective lawyers at our sides. Nathan had coached me on what to expect, But even he raised an eyebrow when Aurora's lawyer opened with a list of demands that could only be described as delusional. She's requesting half of all marital assets, continued spousal support, and contributions to Brooke's college fund, her lawyer said confidently. I almost laughed out loud but managed to keep my composure. No, I said simply. Aurora glared at me. We've been married for 15 years, Sullivan. You don't just get to walk away like none of that matters. Nathan spoke up, his voice calm and professional. Mr. Sullivan has provided extensive evidence of financial misconduct and infidelity. Given the circumstances, Mrs. Sullivan, you're lucky he's even willing to negotiate. Aurora's face tightened, but her lawyer tried to save face. The infidelity is irrelevant to the division of assets in this state. And as for financial misconduct, we'd argue those expenditures fall under normal marital expenses. Nathan slid a stack of documents across the table. I think the court will see it differently. These receipts clearly show funds were used for an affair. Combined with Mrs. Sullivan's long-term deception about her daughter's paternity, we believe the court would be inclined to award Mr. Sullivan a majority of the assets. The room fell silent as Aurora flipped through the documents. I could see the realization dawning on her that she had no leverage. What are you proposing? Her lawyer asked, his tone less confident now. I leaned forward. You get what's fair, Aurora. Not a cent more. I keep the house. I paid for it. Spousal support? Absolutely not. And as for Brooke, I'll set aside some money for her college fund, but Fletcher can step up as her father now. I'm done being the backup plan. Aurora's eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't let it sway me. She had used my kindness against me for too long. We'll review the terms, her lawyer said stiffly. You do that, Nathan replied. But if this goes to court, I assure you the outcome won't be in your client's favor. As we left the room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The end was in sight, and I was finally taking control of my life again. The turning point. Over the next few weeks, I finalized the financial arrangements. Aurora signed the papers, clearly defeated, and the divorce was set to be finalized within the month. I wasted no time reclaiming what was mine. The house was put on the market, and I liquidated unnecessary assets. With the money I'd saved and recouped, I began laying the groundwork for something meaningful, something that would turn my pain into purpose. A new beginning. One evening, I sat in my apartment going over my finances. Years of meticulous accounting had left me in a strong position, even after Aurora's betrayal. I decided then and there that I wasn't just going to rebuild my life, I was going to help others do the same. I started researching charities and organizations for fathers who had been victims of infidelity or paternity fraud. The more I read, the angrier I got. So many men had gone through similar betrayals, pouring love and resources into families only to find out they'd been lied to. By the time I went to bed, I had a plan. I was going to create a foundation dedicated to helping deceived fathers navigate their pain, rebuild their lives, and protect their rights.
Bye.